the enemy when you are at war with the enemy. And therefore, any commercial interest of the enemy has to be weakened. जो दुश्मन देश है उसकी सहायता नहीं होती युद्ध के दौरान. And that is why in 1962 when the war took place, the Defence of India Act was in operation. In 1965 the Defence of India Act was in operation. During those acts, the property which is vested either in the enemy or in a citizen of an enemy, by virtue of Defence of India Act and orders passed therein, transiently gets vested in the government of, it gets vested in the custodian, which gets vested in the government of India. And this took place when the Congress government was in power, and rightly so. But since this was temporary, what happens to the future of those properties? After the war was over, that vesting has taken place in the custodian. What happens to those properties? So in 1968, this main principal act was brought in by Mrs. Gandhi, and a well thought of act. And the act was that those who were at the time of declaration of the war either an enemy state or a citizen of an enemy state, his property now in perpetuity will belong to the government of India. It will be vested in the government itself. That was this law. And that is the principal law which has held the test of time, which continues till today. Therefore, any person who is any state of the government of China, or a citizen of China, or a government of Pakistan, or a citizen of Pakistan, could not after that hold property in India, because under the enemy property regulation, that was this Act of 1968, that property will be vested in the government of India. This was the law. That law continued all these whiles. Now, one solitary case came up, and the background of that solitary case must be known. The British government in the 19th century had given a grant in favor of some of the Indian rulers. And in this case, the grant was in favor of the ruler of the state of Mahmudabad, a state near Awadh, Lucknow. A large amount of land and property in Lucknow city in the adjacent district of Sitapur was owned by them. Now, this entire property which was owned by them vested in the Raja of Mahmudabad. In 1940, when the Pakistan resolution was passed by the Muslim League, the Raja of Mahmudabad decided to throw his weight behind the Pakistan resolution. And he became one of the most ardent supporters of then the person who had created the state of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. In fact, he became a powerful force behind him. History books are now full of evidence of how he went all around the country, that our dream of creating an Islamic state of Pakistan has been made out. And he would refer to the Mahatma and the Congress that they can't fulfill this dream because they represent the Congress and Mahatma represent Hindu nationalism. That was his case. I have voluminous evidence of what the Raja used to say. So once India was partitioned, the Raja decided to leave his properties behind and move out of India. He moved out of India and for some reason went and settled in the first instance in Iran. And thereafter, when Pakistan settled down in 1957, he came to Pakistan, accepted the citizenship of Pakistan, became a Pakistani national, and on behalf of that country, went and established the Islamic Center in London and lived there. But these properties continued to be in his name. He was a citizen of Pakistan living in London. In 1965, by virtue of the Defence of India rules, the properties vested in the government of India. And by virtue of the 1968 law, they also vested in the government of India, the custodian. In 1973, the Raja died. So in 73, when he died, He had lost title of these properties in 1965 because of the law which existed during Mrs. Gandhi's government and 1968 during Mrs. Gandhi's government. So he had ceased to be the owner of these properties in 65. In 73, he did not own these properties. Since he did not own these properties, nobody could have inherited these properties from him. But for one circumstance, that in between he had sent his wife and son to India, and they acquired an Indian citizenship. And thereafter the son went to London to study and then came back. When he came back, he subsequently contested elections, became a member of the Legislative Assembly of UP. He started agitating that these properties be given back to me. Now, obviously, he could only get those properties and inherit those properties from his father, which his father owned in 1973. But the father had lost title of these properties by virtue of the legislation in 1965 and certainly in 1968. He could never get that title through his father in 1973. But for one, which in my respectful submission is a miscarriage of justice, the Supreme Court said, now that the son is a citizen of India, why should he be debarred? And therefore, thousands of crores of worth of properties be transferred to the son. Now these properties have tenants, the whole of Hazratganj, who have been occupying these properties since the 1920s and the 1930s. So the Supreme Court went ahead and said they lose their tenancy and all of them must now give vacant possession to this man. The case went on. Now this was obviously erroneous, because when a citizen of an enemy state loses property in 1965, how could in 1973 his son inherit the property through him? And at that time we had a home minister of the country, an eminent lawyer himself, Mr. Chidambaram, who exactly accepted the argument that I am giving, that in 1973 the Raja's son could not have inherited the properties which the Raja had lost in 1965. So he brought about a clarificatory ordinance. Mr. Chidambaram's ordinance as Home Minister was the correct ordinance. That in 73 he could not get it. Now if there was some internal problem in the then government and an ordinance brought in for a correct purpose was allowed to lapse, and then a second effort was made to bring in a law which did not succeed, then all right, the Raja may have lost the property, but let us give it to his son. Now if this principle is accepted, what will happen? That tomorrow any person who is now a citizen of Pakistan has only to send one family member to India to say, I am now a citizen of India, and acquire properties here and give my properties back. Now families like mine, which have migrated from Pakistan in 1947, is there a reciprocal obligation in Pakistan for this to happen? The obvious answer is no. All properties left behind by those who are now Indian citizens under a similar provision were not only acquired by Pakistan but were auctioned and sold. So what the present government has done is to bring about a law which says that once the original citizen of Pakistan's properties were acquired by the government of India and they vested in the government of India, after 1965, when it became an enemy state, the successor state cannot, his successor cannot get that property. The bill has been cleared by the Lok Sabha. Some amendments have been suggested by the Select Committee, which the Honorable Minister has accepted. And the note of dissent says no, the Succession Act should prevail over this law. But the Succession Act will come into operation only in 1973. But in 1973, the Raja didn't have the properties because the properties were lost in 1965. And therefore, if this principle is accepted, it will open the floodgates of citizens of what is in law regarded as an enemy to come and say, one member of my family has come to India and therefore all the properties will be vested in him. Sir, this is with utmost respect, whatever political signals people want to send, this is a security issue. It's an issue of principle. The rationale behind the principal legislation of 1968 is that you don't allow property or commercial interest of the enemy in India. And an enemy is a person with whom India has gone on to war. And on the date of the war, if he was a citizen of an enemy, he loses his property. By this, forever. Forever. This is the law all over the world. So let us not create only for vote bank politics an exception where enemies by this process, enemies in law, can then get to acquire properties in India. And therefore the urgency is, if this ordinance is allowed to lapse, the effect is going to be, and that's why I oppose the motion of Mr. Subiram Reddy, the property goes back to a person and therefore indirectly through a citizen of Pakistan gets back to somebody who's not entitled to have these properties. And therefore this principle, it has surfaced in the context of one case, and therefore I have given the example of that case. That's the background, we can't ignore it. But the larger principle is, any country with which India has gone to war, its citizens cannot have property in India. That's the principle. Now, if this House wants to negate that principle, let the House say no. And therefore this bill has its urgency and therefore should be cleared.
Okay, thank you, Sri.